This is a clip from one of our recent live streams. We stream live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. As a reminder, this is our second channel, Fish the Moment Live. Our main channel, Fish the Moment, is where we have all of our highly edited YouTube content. We spend 30 to 40 hours a week producing one YouTube video that's posted on the Fish the Moment channel every Friday at 7 a.m. Central Standard Time. These videos include on-the-water footage of us actually fishing, as well as detailed instruction on how to use electronics, fish offshore, and a lot of other great information. Make sure to check out the Fish the Moment channel if you enjoy the content on this channel. What is up, y'all? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. Tonight, Randy and I are going to be tackling a kind of an interesting topic. Is Livescope hurting fishing? And it's not in the way you might think, in terms of making fishing maybe easier, things like that, but actually how it affects bass in terms of their behavior. What we've seen recently, especially myself, is that the fish on offshore spots are acting a little bit different than what I'm used to seeing over the last, 8 to 10 years. And I'm going to explain what I'm talking about there. We're going to maybe try to compare the impact of the Alabama rig 10 years ago to the impact of Livescope on bass behavior. Maybe there's something there, maybe there isn't. We're going to get into it tonight. Randy, how's it going?
Doing good, Johnny, man. I'm really excited to get into the topic tonight because, when we came up with the topic, that we're talking about Livescope and if the bass are getting conditioned to it, I got really excited at the thought or the possibility that Livescope may be going down in effectiveness. So anything that will give us shallow water hoggers an advantage, I was pretty up for that. So this could be interesting tonight.
For sure, and I'm not going to say the Livescope isn't helpful or useful anymore, but it's just maybe not as easy to just go out and Livescope fish as it was the last couple of years just because of how popular and how available it is. So we'll get into it. I'll explain what I'm talking about. Don't go hating in the comments already before we even start. You'll understand what I'm talking about once I explain the situation here. Before we get into that, we want to take care of some housekeeping items. First, we want to thank Bridgeford for again sponsoring the Fish Moment podcast. They've sponsored us now for 3 or 4 podcasts, and they seem to enjoy what we're doing. So appreciate everyone who is going out and purchasing some Bridgeford beef jerky. Helps out the channel. It really helps continue to support us, and you just get a really great product. Why I think Livescope is maybe hurting the fish a little bit, what the challenge is a little bit, because I don't think that a lot of guys are using Livescope enough consistently to maybe see the negative effect it's having on fish populations. Here's a spot that we were fishing last Friday on Table Rock Lake, and I pulled up here while we were doing a shallow versus offshore challenge with Randy, and it's basically just a main lake point with a creek channel that swings by it, a super obvious looking area. And when I pulled up on this spot, you could see fish all over the Livescope. It was super easy to see them, and if you check out our offshore versus shallow challenge video, I'll have the Livescope recordings in there. But for now, just know that they're up on top of this point. And I pulled up there and started throwing a variety of baits at these fish that you could see on the Livescope. You could see 15 to 20 fish grouped up really tight. I was throwing deep diving crankbaits. I threw a shaky head, a football jig, all this stuff. And what I was doing with my Livescope is I was getting my boat within 60 to 70 feet of these fish, where I could actually see them very clearly on the Livescope. But for whatever reason, I could not get a single fish to bite, no matter what baits I threw at them. It really didn't matter. What I then did is I thought, okay, well, if I can't get these fish to bite on a normal bait, or really any bait, there's 2 things that's happening. One, these fish are getting so pressured on the spot by other fishermen, which there were other fishermen around fishing these areas. It's not like a super hidden area. It's kind of a community hole. If I can't get bit and there's dozens of fish here, there has to be one of 2 things. Either I still don't have the right bait or I'm approaching this the wrong way. Well, after trying 7 or 8 baits, I knew that wasn't the number of baits I was trying or the type of bait. So what I ended up doing was actually backing my boat up and spot locking for about 10 minutes. And I just sat there and stayed, in one spot with the spot lock on and just didn't really do anything. I just kind of hung out, redid some camera batteries, stuff like that. And then what I did is I cast back up on top of this spot. But instead of casting up there where my boat was close enough to see those fish on the Livescope, let's say when I had 80 or 90 foot range, I got my boat so I was like 120 to 130 feet away from those fish, which is a super long distance away from those fish. And when I was fishing in that area, because those fish were so far away from me now, I had to go to a bait that I could cast a mile. And one of the baits I can cast really, really far is a little hair jig. So I just tied on this half-ounce hair jig that I could cast a mile. I knew that the hair jig is good at triggering some of those inactive fish as well. And I had tried the hair jig previously when I was 60 to 70 feet away from those fish, but after moving to about 120 feet away from those fish, not being able to see them on the live scope and firing that hair jig out there, I was getting bit every single cast. I caught like 15 to 17 fish off the spot, had 14 pounds for my heaviest fish, and just was putting them in the boat non-stop. And I'd fished that spot for 15 minutes prior, never got a bite, and it was because of my proximity to those fish. I was so close to those fish to see them on the live scope that it messed up those fish in some way. And the reason I feel like this is happening, guys, is because if you look at this point here, a lot of these areas in the past on a point like this, if you just had your standard 2D sonar, down imaging, side imaging, you might have a guy that graphs over this point, sees the point, and maybe sees a couple fish, and then pulls up here and starts randomly fan casting on this area. When they do that, they may randomly catch a fish or two, but they're not really super efficient at how they cover the spot. Now, I see a lot of guys not only graphing these areas, but some guys just pull up to a point like this, drop their live scope, and just start live scoping without even graphing. And while I've made videos explaining why that's not efficient, it still works. And you might find those fish, see them on the live scope, and then start fishing them. And what it does is it allows guys to get on the exact sweet spot where these fish are setting up. They'll set up right on that sweet spot that's maybe the size of the front deck of your boat, and they'll use the live scope to pinpoint exactly where that sweet spot is. They'll then make cast after cast after cast to that exact spot and catch those fish. Well, I feel like now those fish are getting kind of almost conditioned to those guys hitting that exact sweet spot while having their boat close to those fish, and it's messing up those fish. They're not biting as well just because there's increased pressure and there's increased efficiency from anglers due to live scope. Therefore, to get those fish to bite, a lot of times you have to get really far away from them, almost like being stealthy or sneaky offshore. And that's not normally something I ever really worried about until really this past year. And I've seen it happen in a couple other lakes I fish as well in this past fall, where if I saw the fish on the live scope, I couldn't catch them. But if I stayed far enough away from them and didn't use the live scope, I could actually get those fish to bite. And there were actually times I would turn the live scope off. And one example of this that was really, really cool was down on Lake 10 Killer last fall. There were some areas where I was catching fish on offshore brush piles off some main lake points and things like that. And if I got within 100 feet of that brush pile with my boat, those fish would not even touch a bait. But if I could cast out there more than 100 feet away without seeing them on live scope, I would catch a 3 or 4 pounder every single time. So what this is telling me is that a lot of guys are now using live scope. They're getting more efficient, and these offshore fish are getting conditioned to the fishing pressure. It's not necessarily, I feel like, that they're getting conditioned to live scope. It's not like the sound of the sonar or anything like that. It's mainly just an element of guys are getting more efficient in hitting those sweet spots, and you have to change up your approach. Stay further away, use a different bait, stuff like that, to really get these fish to bite, even when you know they're there. What are your thoughts there, Randy?
Oh man, I've got a lot of different questions and thoughts to both on that. It's really an unusual situation from what you're telling me right there, because like when I fished that Toyota Series tournament at Lake of the Ozarks this past March, one of the guys that did really good the last day of the tournament, he had one of the biggest bags of the day. He was fishing like right where I was, like we were talking to each other, and he was totally live scoping. We were out on the shallow flat, just fan casting. Excuse me. There was a lot of shad in the area, a lot of stumps, and he was casting his Alabama rig like 20 foot in front of the boat, and he was like literally, you could almost flip to how far he was casting up in front of the boat, and he was catching them. So, do the fish have a different personality under different conditions, different seasons, depending upon how it's set up? And then it gets in the whole topic, the larger picture about how quickly bass evolve to escape being caught, or to just to survive in general. Because I look back, like let's go for the Alabama rig, for example. I remember the first time that I took an Alabama rig up at Stockton Lake, when it pretty much first came out. You could put the big giant Alabama rig with no spinners and the big giant wires and the big swim baits on it, and you could go to about any main lake point and catch them on it. But then quickly after that, like I'm talking about just a couple months later, they wouldn't bite that. And you had to downsize your baits a little bit. You had to downsize the profile of your Alabama rig. And then you started catching a few more fish. Now, it's sort of the same with the Livescope as far as that group of fish there. Do the bass have some type of a collective consciousness that allows them to discern amongst something that is a threat to them or not? And this goes into a whole nother conversation. You can apply it to Livescope, you can apply it to technique. And from what I've seen in my own fishing like that, I think bass learn quick. I think they evolve quick, and I think they are masters at adapting to their environment far greater than what we give them credit for.
For sure. And I'll kind of address some of those things here, Andy. There's also a bunch of comments. By the way, forgot to give a shout out to everyone. Thanks, Robert, for the. We got too excited jumping in the topic. Want to give a shout out to everyone on the live stream here. Got Ryan, Chad, Robert, Timo, Michael, Ernest, John, Bill, Steve, Tim, ton of other guys. Andrew, how's it all going, guys? Sorry if I didn't give a shout out there to everyone. But a couple of things I did want to address really quick. I'm just seeing some comments too, Randy. I want to take all these kind of questions and concerns, and then we'll kind of knock them out one at a time because there's a lot that goes on here. But one thing the guys are saying is maybe it's something about the sound of the Livescope, so that might be something there. One guy mentioned that he has an active target from Lowrance, so he can't comment on the Livescope. When I talk about Livescope, we just mean forward-facing sonar, whether that's active target, Livescope, Humminbird Mega Live. They all kind of have the same idea. It's forward-facing sonar regardless of brand. So maybe we should say that instead of Livescope. It's kind of like Tissue and Kleenex. You use the brand name. Hopefully that makes sense, but we're talking about forward-facing sonar in general here. But some people are saying it might be the sound. Maybe Dan or Jonathan says maybe I just was early to the bite window, or maybe I was just kind of that's just subtle change in conditions. And to kind of address that, Jonathan, I've seen this happening for like several months now, for over the past like 8 or 9 months. So this isn't something that's new in terms of these fish not liking me getting close to the spots, and I've actually experimented with it, tested with it, so I know this is actually something that's happening. It's not a conditions change. It's not a like a bite window thing. It's actual like stealthiness of getting up to the spots. To give you a prime example, I went out to a lake the other day that is by my house. I'll just give you I'm not going to show you the exact lake because people get mad if I talk about the exact lake because it gets enough pressure as it is. But let's just have a lake here, for example. This is one of the other lakes in my area. And basically, in the winter, I was going around. They made a forward-facing sonar video where I was chasing schools of gizzard shad out in the middle of the lake. And I was catching fish when they were 30 to 40 feet in front of my boat with a big, giant swim bait and a 6-inch Megamass mag draft and just catching them out here in the open. And then you come back later in the summer, and I was just there a couple weeks ago when I was filming that Mega Live video, and if you went to one particular drop-off or ledge, the fish were all over it, but if you got within 100 feet of that ledge or 100 feet of those fish, they wouldn't bite. But if you could stay more than 100 feet away from them, basically see them with the Livescope or the Mega Live like I was using, back off and then cast to those fish, you could get them to bite. And the only difference is that the fish that were out here in the middle of the lake out here were not getting pressured by anyone. I never saw anyone else all year except for like 1 or 2 guys I told about it going out in the middle of the lake chasing those fish with the Livescope in the middle of nowhere. Those fish just weren't getting pressured, so you could throw a big bait and fish it 30 to 40 feet in front of the boat and catch those fish. Kind of like what Randy was talking about earlier too, some of those guys in Lake of the Ozarks were employing the Alabama rig plus the Livescope and only throwing that bait 30 to 40 feet out and getting fish to bite. That's because they were harnessing the power of the Livescope plus the Alabama rig. That's a really powerful combo. But that's probably going to wear off in effectiveness very, very quickly after a lot of guys start doing it. However, on this offshore ledge on this lake I was on, that spot is one of the most fished areas in my area of the country. It's so many people go there, so many people fish that one drop off over and over and over again. And basically, those fish are so pressured, and all the guys out there have live scope, and they're pointing it right at those fish, and those fishes won't touch a bait. It was so tough to get them to bite. The only way I could do it is get really far away from those fish and make really long casts, not seeing them on the mega live. That was the whole deal to get them to bite. And again, I've probably seen it happen 6 or 7 times, Randy. So it's definitely not necessarily, in my opinion, a conditions thing. It's not just like a chance thing. It really is, these fish are getting conditioned to, I think it's just increased fishing pressure because guys are just getting better at what they're doing. I don't think live scope, I personally don't think it's the sound of the transducer, the ping. Maybe that does have a sense, or maybe they've kind of clued into it a little bit where they feel that ping. And one thing I actually plan on doing is going out one day, graphing a bunch of spots and finding a bunch of schools of fish, and then running those areas with and without live scope and doing a test to see, if I go 2 days in a row or something, I don't know how I could do it to control the variables. It's kind of difficult, but like, could you catch more fish if you knew the fish were there and could hit that spot without live scope versus with live scope? You might actually be able to catch them better, maybe by using 360 imaging or something else. So it's just my observation there, but I think that's what's going on. I think it's just fish are getting conditioned to the offshore fishing pressure due to the live scope, whether it's the sound of the live scope, boat distance, something's messing them up. That's what I would say.
Yeah, to me, this is a fascinating topic because, like I said, I like to look at bass fishing from a little bit different perspective than a lot of people look at. And I'll sort of relate some stuff, and I've used this analogy before, but it's really applicable here. If you take back in the 1970s, I've talked about us using like the old head and hellbenders and that type of stuff before in the past, which was a really good lure around Table Rock Lake back in the 70s. It's just a big metal lip walleye looking bait, and caught a lot of big ones on it. I mean, there was a lot of 7 to 10 pound bass caught at Table Rock 50 years ago on it. But if you would take that same bait out today and throw it on Table Rock Lake, I would venture to say you could throw it for a week and maybe not even get a bite on it. And obviously, these bass have never seen that. These fish that are in the lake in the year 2021 have not seen a big hellbender like they did back in 1968, yet they will not bite it. So what has happened there? It's like, have these fish evolved to sense that this particular thing is not food from 50 years ago? And it's sort of the same with the live scope now. Are the bass evolving that quick to not position in the same way they were just 2 years ago? We're talking about live scopes have been around, approximately 2 years. And one of the things about live scope is a lot of anglers, they tend to run the same type of water with the live scope. Say, for example, I'll go back to Table Rock again. Everybody live scopes the middle of these ditches in the creeks and cove arms at Table Rock. That's just what they do. They get down the middle of those ditches, they get out in 60 to 80 feet of water, and they basically just scan that entire channel at various depth ranges. Now, are those fish getting conditioned to the trolling motor and boat noise that they're normally not accustomed to in the middle of those channels? That is, that's one thing to consider. Or are the bass evolving on some deeper level? And I'll throw one sort of analogy that's way out in left field there, just for thought. I'd like to hear you guys comment. I'm pretty big in archaeology and Native American stuff like that, and a lot of the archaeologists they basically determined, say for example, there's certain spear points like called the Clovis head point that certain tribes used at a certain period of time, yet they feel across on a different continent there's another group of people that basically started developing and making these same type of points on a different continent, but they started doing it at the same time. Same with fire. They basically predicted humans started using fire at the same point of time throughout the world. So you have some type of a collective consciousness. My question I want to pose to maybe our listeners here, do you guys think that bass have some type of a collective consciousness that allows them to educate themselves and survive because they've been around for so long? Is that something that's real, or is that something that is too far out there? But I've seen it in my own fishing. I mean, I've experienced it in fishing the last 40 years, and I have come up with no conclusion other than that. So What
That's
everybody think about
fascinating.
that?
Well, I don't think that there's anyone who's really maybe studied that, but maybe there's studies on, like you said, humans, other animals. So, I mean, that's beyond my understanding, but I think that that's fascinating just as a concept. I love your Hellbender analogy. If that was the best bait 40 years ago, yeah, you would really struggle to catch a fish on a Hellbender. And just so you guys know, I'll pull up just for those who don't know what the Hellbender is, let me pull up. Let me pull up an example here, just so you guys know what Randy's talking about with this Hellbender. Here's the Hellbender that Randy's talking about. This giant metal-lipped bait. I mean, it's really aggressive. It's large. It's 5 inches long. It's heavy. It's yeah. It's definitely not subtle. And a couple of really interesting comments I see here that I kind of wanted to point out. One is from Ira, and he says. I see guys on the Elite Series talk about having to stay way back, 100 or more feet off of a spot all the time. This is on heavily pressured lakes, Texas, TVA, etc. And also, Nathan says it's basically what we deal with here in Southern California. It's pressure. In order to get them to bite, we have to downsize and back way off to get bites. Break out the 6-pound line. And that's something that I see, Randy, happening on our lakes especially, and probably I'm one of the instigators of this whole thing because I'm teaching so many people how to fish offshore. I see people all the time who are offshore fishing and they're like, "Oh, I saw you in this video." Especially in my lakes, they'll be out there on all the spots I do my videos and stuff, and I'm fine with that. That doesn't bother me, but it's causing me to adapt my fishing style and techniques. And it might get to the point, honestly, Randy, where I might have an advantage over other anglers because I know how to catch fish without the live scope offshore. I can literally turn the live scope off. I can just graph with my down imaging, side imaging, mark those fish, and hit those fish using my old waypoint method, stuff like that. It may be one of those deals where you almost have to revert back. The way I think about this is back when the Alabama rig was really popular. Back in the day, I remember back in 2010, 2011, whenever that came out, you could just throw this on all my lakes around here and just throw it and throw it and throw it and catch them. And then around like 2013, 2014, it was still good, but it wasn't as good. And I could go back to a regular jerkbait actually and catch them better on a regular jerkbait than I could on the Alabama rig just because every other boat was throwing the Alabama rig. And I basically went back to old techniques to catch them. It may be the same thing with forward-facing sonar going forward, is that once everyone gets it, especially as the price point drops and everyone really gets a handle on it and gets their hands on it, it might be a deal where just take it off the boat and you might be able to catch them better. Now, that's going to only work, obviously, if you know how to find and catch fish offshore traditionally. But what it could also do is if guys go out with their live scope or their active target or whatever for 4 or 5 hours, they might see bass all over the graph and never get them to bite and just get discouraged. And it's not because there aren't bass there. It's just that they're so conditioned to guys fishing for them and being able to find them easily that you might be able to see them on the live scope, but never really get them to bite, except for in very specific lakes, specific situations where there's less pressure or it's a less common area, stuff like that. If you enjoy our videos and want a free and easy way to support the channel, head to our website, fishthemoment.com. Then head to the Support Fish the Moment page. Here you'll find our Tackle Warehouse affiliate link. If you click this link, then check out on Tackle Warehouse, we'll get a small percentage of your sales. The way this works is that we have a special link with Tackle Warehouse. So if you bookmark this link on your web browser and then click it every single time you visit Tackle Warehouse, you'll be supporting Fish the Moment with every bait you buy.
It sort of reminds me also. Okay, let's go back and look at the evolution of electronics and bass fishing. We all started out with the old flashers, or in fact, some of you guys remember the old flashers, some of you guys don't. But we started out with the old flashers, and once we got the liquid crystal displays, the original old school 2D sonars, that opened up a different population of fish for us to catch. And then we evolved to the side imaging technology. The 2D sonar got a little bit more advanced, side imaging, down imaging. And what happened, every step along the way when that technology evolved, it allowed us to put more and more pressure on those fish that normally did not get any pressure. Because, take, for example, a main lake point. Back when we were using flashers, we couldn't really detect suspended fish out on the end of a main lake point. I know, Johnny, you're an expert at getting out on those super deep points like at Table Rock Lake, and you can down scan and side image those suspended bass that are in the little wolf packs on the end of those points. And I know you've even made a comment before how sometimes those can be finicky. But back 40 years ago, when we just had flashers, those fish were totally untapped. People didn't know what they were looking at if they looked at a wolf pack of 5 or 6 bass suspended 30 foot down over 60 foot of water. Those were completely untapped fish. And now, you've got every guide on Table Rock Lake or wherever across the country that specifically target those fish with that technology. So it's almost like that every type of area that you catch fish on is constantly changing with the advancement of the technology. And the fish, they either move and reposition, or like you said, they get a little bit more finicky, a little bit more wary to catch. So I think that the path we're on with this right now, I think that bass are going to continue to get smarter. They're going to continue to evolve. And as long as we keep ahead of them with evolving bait and lure technologies, that's the only way that we're going to maintain our fishing. Because if we don't do that, it'd be like you tying on a black jig with the number one pork frog and trying to compete flipping behind somebody that's got a brush hog or a beaver on it. You're just not going to get that many bites.
For sure. And, there's some really, really good comments coming in, guys. Ernest says, life is always adapting and evolving, which is true. I feel like every single time I think I figure out fishing, Randy, I got to relearn it and re-experiment. And that's the reason I feel like I've been successful catching fish over my lifetime, is I'm always willing to scrap everything I know and try something different. And that's what you have to do in fishing a lot of times, because if you get stuck on what you feel like a lot of times it's not going to end up working out, because the fish change, conditions change, pressure changes, everything like that. And one thing I saw here that was kind of interesting is more impacted by the boat presence. That's kind of how I'm thinking about it in my head. I don't think it's actually the ping or the sonar sound. I think it's just that boat presence, and the guys are getting more accustomed to getting in those fish are. But also those guys, a lot of guys I see are getting too close to the spots with their Livescope. They'll try to get 30 or 40 feet away from the fish and try to watch their bait fall down to those fish and try to catch them. And that doesn't always work out as well either, because they're getting way too close to those fish, especially in shallower water. Another comment I thought was pretty interesting is from Michael. Do you feel like the water clarity affects the fish's pressure reaction on offshore spots? I've found that it doesn't really matter, honestly, that much if you're in really shallow water, really deep water, really dirty water, really clear water. I find that the fish are affected by pressure equally in those situations, though you can get a little bit closer to those fish I see in that little bit dirtier water. So it's slight. It's not like crazy, but I do see maybe you can get a little bit closer in dirty water, but still there's the sound of the trolling motor. There's just the wake of the boat hitting the top of the water. They can kind of sense that stuff, not just from line of sight, but they can feel the vibrations and everything of the trolling motor going, of all that stuff with their lateral line. Another thing I've found, Randy, is I actually catch more fish when I don't spot lock. So I actually sometimes will turn the spot lock off so my engine isn't going all the time. If I don't need the spot lock, I won't. I will just leave spot lock off so that trolling motor isn't going as often, which helps me catch more fish as well. So there's a lot of stuff that can go into this, and this is really... this is really interesting because it gets into a lot of the science of fishing, and this is more the abstract element. I know you love this, Randy, and I'm big on this too, because it's something that I feel like a lot of guys just don't think about that much, and it's very complicated. But if this is the type of stuff you really need to get to geek out about if you want to be a really, really effective fisherman.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when you talk about some of the abstract parts of fishing, because I know, like on my YouTube channel, anytime I go off into the abstract, people just aren't interested in that, because people want to be able to put bass fishing in this nice little box that they can control and identify, and that's just not the case of it a lot of times. I mean, there's so much mystery behind this that I don't even think we've tapped the surface on understanding bass behavior. But back to your point about the awareness of the boats being on the water, I don't think you can really underestimate trolling motor noise on whether it be live scope fish or shallow fish or whatever, because these bass, when you got to consider ever since a bass is hatched out, and from the time that they're a little bitty fry, trolling motor noises are just as much a part of their environment as a cold front that comes through or a flood or low water conditions. It's part of their environment. They don't know any different. I mean, they as far as they know, a trolling motor noise is part of the natural world. So ever since they're a little fry, they've evolved to be able to pick up on increased frequency of trolling motor noises, the pitch of it, just the overall sound underneath the water. And I think that they have just evolved, and they evolve from the time that they're a little bitty fry, and they get better and better and better at it as they get bigger and bigger. And when they sense a trolling motor, and they sense a multitude of trolling motors, I think it completely affects their behavior. I mean, I really do. I think a trolling motor noise, doesn't matter what trolling motor you have, the sound is amplified tremendously underneath the water. And, whether it be, like I said, if you're tying it into Livescope, offshore fishing, or shallow, I think that has a huge impact on the mood of the bass and their willingness to bite and just feed in general.
For sure, 100% agree, both offshore and shallow. One question we got here from Jim, he one comment, he says, I think we're overthinking this. I own a Livescope. If bass could become educated, we would no longer catch a bass on a plastic worm. And I definitely see where Jim's coming from on this, in the sense that maybe we're overthinking a little bit. But you have to think, Jim, about the perspective that Randy and I are taking. We're not talking about going out and catching 1 or 2 fish. We're trying to talk about the difference between catching 5 fish and catching 15 fish due to fishing pressure. For example, if you go out on Table Rock Lake, where you have 75 to 80 anglers fishing every 3 miles on the lake on a Saturday. I mean, there's ridiculous number of boats. There's thousands of boats fishing almost every single weekend on Table Rock Lake. This means that every spot that I go and fish probably has 4 or 5 other guys fishing it that same day. They're all throwing the same bait. They're all getting up close to the fish and pressuring those fish. On those lakes, those fish will become accustomed to baits and noise and pressure and all this stuff. Randy's seen it happen. I've seen it happen. We know for a fact it does happen. If you go to a lake, for example, in Wisconsin, where there's 6 boats that fish there year-round, and those fish have no pressure on them for half the year because the lakes are iced over, yeah, those fish are not as much pressured, and they'll catch fish. You can catch those fish on a plastic worm, and you can catch them year-round in the Senko or whatever. It all comes down to how much pressure those fish are getting relative to the size of the lake, how often those fish are pressured, stuff like that. So you have to think relative. Yes, not every bass in the country is getting equal amount of pressure as the lakes that Randy and I fish. We fish very pressured fish on our lakes. Grand Lake, Table Rock Lake, these lakes get tons of pressure. And that's where we're coming from. And yes, you can go catch a fish on Livescope, getting close to the fish and cranking them or just throwing whatever baits and get 1 or 2 bites. But like on Table Rock, I tried that. I maybe would get 1 or 2 bites or 3 bites all day if I got within 70, 80 feet of those fish, saw them on the Livescope, and casted with a normal bait, a football jig, a crankbait. But then when I would back off from those fish to 120 feet, throw a hair jig that's not as common of a bait, I was catching 15 to 20 fish off that spot. So I was catching 5 times more fish. It's not that all the fish are educated or that you can't catch fish and everything. It's more of a perspective, if that makes sense. Or it's that the scale of it. And I see, Jim, you said, I'm more concerned with the tremendous influx of boat traffic. I think with COVID, everyone bought 2 boats. That's the deal. That's what we're talking about, Jim. It's just the boat traffic, boat pressure. That's the stuff that gets on. And some lakes just are affected more than others. So that's the deal. Thanks for checking out the video. If you made it this far, we'd really appreciate if you left a like on the video. It helps us out with the YouTube algorithm and gets these videos out to more people. Also consider subscribing. It's free and it lets you get notifications of every single one of our videos that we upload daily. Finally, remember to check out the main Fish the Moment channel, where we actually have on-the-water fishing footage as well as detailed graphics on electronics, offshore fishing, bass behavior, and a lot of other great information. Thanks for checking out the video, and we'll see you all in the next one.